Welcome those who are watching us on live stream and welcome our community advisors to the meeting. Welcome those who are going to make a deputation shortly and ask Councillor Cranston to open the meeting, please. Thank you, Councillor Cranston.
Nau mai haere mai kia koutou kia tai mai nei mō tēnei hui, anei taku karakia. Tautoka hia tēnei hui, tautoka hia tēnei ropu. Support this hui, support this group. Tukua a mātou whānau kua iti motu ki te aohurihuri. Support our families who are throughout the country and throughout the world. Kororo nia ia kororo nia I te kaupapa o te wā. Support the subjects of what we're speaking of today. Arahina na whiti kōrero ki wānganui I a mātou. Arahina na whiti whakaro ki wānganui I a mātou. Arahina na pātai, arahina na tūrei nei ki a puta ai te mana. Tihei Maurior.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Cranston. Director, welcome the Mayor. Thank you for your attendance at this Regional Transport Committee meeting. We have two apologies, one from Ingrid Meister and one from Barney Tupra, moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor Worsnop. I put that those apologies be accepted, please. All those in favour say aye. And contrary carried. Thank you. Welcome to those that have just joined us. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome to Waka Kotahi and to your team members that you will introduce at the time that are coming to speak, Linda and Sarah. Thank you. So are there any declarations of interest?
We lease the property that is being worked on in the Koparo Road. I'm not sure if that's relevant, but it's mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we need to. So we moved, sorry, Councillor Cranston.
There is a quick mention of work being done on the Tarahia Cycle Walkway by the Cycle and Walkway Trust, and I'm a trustee on that.
Thank you. Noted. Thank you. We note those two, but I don't think they impact on decisions that you'll make today, but thank you for declaring them. So we move to the confirmation of the non-confidential minutes that appear on page 5. Moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor Cranston, that the minutes be signed as a true and correct record. Please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary carried. Are there any matters arising that anyone wishes to raise? Councillor Worsnop.
Thank you. Just on page 9, where it refers to the strategic work with regards to freight, I was just wondering if I know that was brought to us, the paper didn't have a lot of information in it because it was quite a last minute thing. Was there the intention to flesh that out a little bit more, or does it just arrive? Is there, what's the process with regards to how that progresses?
So would you like to? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
It has progressed and is progressing at pace. Lisa Mouldy, actually, who's with us today, is leading that piece of work. We've held 2 investment logic mapping workshops, one face-to-face and one online, involving all councils that have expressed an interest in participating. That is at an officer level, as well as sector and industry representatives. So we can certainly look to bring a further update for you, but that is on track to have a draft for that by the end of this year. Yeah.
And will we be able to ask some more questions later in the presentation by your colleague?
Lisa's not here to specifically cover that one,
but
okay. I'm sure between the 3 of us that you've got here, we might be able to.
Well, I can follow up now.
I really only raised it there because it isn't mentioned in the Waka Kotahi report. And I think possibly maybe in a future Waka Kotahi report, it could be? Possibly.
Maybe that's better now. It will be. So just as mentioned, they're happy to bring back a bit of a fuller update to the next RTC. If that's,
And will that include the fourth bullet point? Because I had written myself a note beside that where I wondered what feedback you had from the minister. Council alongside Wairoa and Hawke's Bay Regional Council have completed the report going to the minister for review. Do you have any response to that?
we have received no feedback as yet on that from the minister. Council may have received feedback directly. Oh, everyone's shaking their heads.
Okay, thank you for that. Were there any further questions with respect to the minutes? If not, then thank you. We move to the action sheet, which is page 11. There's only one item. It's going to be covered in the road safety report, so we'll move on from there. Thank you. We have the government's work plan, which is in front of us. Items are in front of us today. I have no request for leave of absence, no acknowledgement and tributes, and I invite Marcus Williams to join us for a public deputation. Thank you very much, Marcus. Would you like to come to the front? Thank you, Mr. Williams, to be consistent with my formality. Thank you. You can sit or stand, whatever.
I should probably stand.
You please yourself.
Good afternoon, all. I've even got a title there, Turiha Erosion. I actually have made a presentation a number of years ago, maybe 12, worried about the stability of the coastline, which goes particularly from Tautapuri around to the Puawa. And not very much has been done about that, except when it starts to threaten the road. But even then, seems it's left until a wee bit late, too late sometimes. I'm not too sure. That's the wrong one, is it? I just, oopsie.
Here we go.
So these are in no particular order, but so I'll just, these are the protection which has been put in. This is in fact just down below my house, which I was blissfully unaware of until very recently. I don't know when it happened, but I mean, that seems to me to be very good protection. And it seems to work well. But that's what has been in place. That is something, but I suspect that is part of the old Turiha Bridge, which was put there a long time ago. That's straight down the bottom again, but that's just a matter of interest for you, so you can see what is on the beach, because a lot of people use that beach. They come out, there's people stop there all the time. They're either fishing or onto the rocks and whatever. Now that is another picture of that wall which I was unaware of. And on the left-hand end, you can see there's a concrete wall there, which goes right along. And from my, I stand to be corrected, but that has been there for most of my life, if not longer, that I remember. It's done a very good job. But it's also in some ways protected by the reef, because the reef is 200+ meters out. So no matter how big the waves are, they get diminished by the time they get to the wall. But you can see what has happened, and that seems, it looks good, and it's a good form of protection. And there's another view of the same from a different perspective. Now this is on the Turiha Point, which is just past that. Now that I've got to turn this thing on. Oh, I've got it. I don't know if you can see that. Until relatively recently, I'm maybe talking 10 years, I could actually drive my vehicle around the outside of that barrier that's on the point there. And then suddenly, almost overnight, one of these chutes came in from the sea, right up to the wall. It can happen, seems to me, it can happen very, very quickly. And then you've got this one here, which is obviously quite recent. That is clearly a liability in my understanding, because you literally can't see it until you're on top of it. And there's more of those around the place. Now that's just on the, that's looking towards the Turihoa woolshed. This is where the sea's at the moment. And I would have thought that was more than a liability. That's an accident waiting to happen.
Can I just say at that one, Marcus, I think that's outside the area that the Turihoa Point restoration, can you get back to that one, use that thing? Oh,
That's
you've
it,
got it.
yeah.
That's not at the, within the point, even though it's only about 50 meters from the point.
Hmm. And there's another one which is where the trucks pull off further along.
Keep going, Marcus, but I just think.
Anyway, this is a slight deviation. This is the Turihoa River. And that facility, that piece of land there was, I could say, accidentally given to the council a number of years ago. It wasn't the intention, but we were very comfortable with the fact that it was there. But this is a very recent thing. It's happened in the last couple of weeks with that rain. The river does flow out there normally, but it's obviously come around, and there's a big chunk of that picnic ground which has just disappeared overnight. And probably all it needed was just to have a little dig or something, and then just to keep the flow going straight out. My father, I remember my father saying that the river tends to flow with the current, and it can go up to 100 yards either side. But I mean, we can control that. That's not an issue. But there's a big chunk of land which is premium picnic area which has just vanished within the last couple of weeks or so. And that's just a wee bit further around the Puawa corner. So you can see the sort of things that are happening. Right on the point, there was one of those things came in. There were 2 pahudakawa trees that literally dropped into that thing. So I mean, this is the coastline that we're living on. And there's that wall that I mentioned. This was just taken yesterday. So that's been there possibly for 60 plus years. It's obviously done a pretty good job. And this one here, you can see this is again down below the house, but that's actually made quite a nice, it's been covered up along the top there. Quite a good access way for people who want to walk along there, because obviously you don't want to be trying to walk on top of those big boulders because they're quite big. So I just did that one this morning. This is Puawa. And we used to go around as kids and slide down the sandhills. You might recall that down there is a cemetery. Now my father, I can remember again, my father telling me that in the early days, the beach used to go right out to where those rocks are out there. Some of that might have happened through global warming, which is another matter, but also the Gisborne city was taking, when I was young, was taking sand off that beach. And I can remember on one day, they said there were 16 trucks on the beach loading sand to bring into town. Now, the trucks weren't quite the same size as they are today, and they were all loaded by hand with a shovel. So it was probably quite hard work. But I mean, clearly a lot of sand has been taken away from that beach. Forget about what the ocean's done as well. So that's, if you like, something that we as a community have to be considered responsible for. As you'll be aware, there's a lot of social activity takes place along this beach, a lot of camping, a lot of recreation, particularly through the summer months as people come out from town all the time. So that is eroding and disappearing quite quickly. Now to get back to It's the end of that's good. So you don't have to look at any more pictures. To me, we have a real liability. We come back again. I must have hit something by mistake. We know that erosion is taking place. I would suggest to you that beach is one of the really unique assets of our community. It's not many places you go and just stop beside the road and have a picnic or go and use the sea or swim or whatever it is that they do. But it is going. Now they say, well, climate change is responsible for that. Well, the climate put things in historic perspective. The climate has always changed. And many of you will be aware that we've just started coming out of what they call the mini ice age 200 years ago, in a period when the Thames River used to freeze over to the extent they could have city fairs on the ice. I mean, that's quite mind-boggling in today's environment, to just try and relate to that. But regardless of what's happening there, that is a threat. It's an asset which exists, well, used to exist. A lot of it's gone already because of the action of the sea. And it needs urgent attention now in terms of protecting the road and making sure that because it's right up to the edge of the road, as you've seen. I think we have it, and we can obviously protect it. I would say, to my perspective, it's crazy not to be protecting what is left of that coastline, because it's, as I said, it's a valuable asset, and we're not going to be able to retrieve it once it's gone. I don't know whether I had anything. Did you have any questions? Or
I'm going to invite the committee who may ask questions. We can't debate
what
the
else did I have? Yeah, but as I said, that when you get those suits coming in, particularly around that point, you would have thought it was fairly stable ground, but it can happen almost overnight. Suddenly you get a sea that comes in and makes these fairly narrow, very deep channels that come into the. I think that's probably as much.
Covers what you wanted to share with us today.
That's what I wanted to share with you. I think we've missed an opportunity to preserve a lot of what was there, and a lot of that has now gone.
I'll open it for questions.
Okay, yep.
So does the committee have any questions? Thank you, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marcus. I'm very familiar with that. I've walked along there and over to the top of that breakwater and everything. It's probably a question of David, the cost and availability of those rocks, and as an engineering solution, is it accepted? Because you can see how close it is to the road at the moment. So it's kind of that stitch in time sort of stuff looking to me.
Thank you, Councillor Cranston. There's a couple of issues there. One's an engineering thing, which is Waka Kotahi, because it's state highway. The second is a consenting issue around hard structures within the coastal environment and the effects that then has on the beach environment. In particular for Te Whakapariri all the way through to Pauawa, there's issues with sand. There's a marine area, as we know. There's a number of significant urupa through there as well. So it's quite a difficult consenting issue, let alone an engineering exercise. And we've been working with Waka Kotahi for a long time, shall we say, to try and figure out what the solutions are for along there. But I think, without saying, we know there's an issue there, but it's what the solution looks like going forward.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Councillor Worsnop.
My question was just the extent to which, obviously, where our TRMP review is due to give us a coastal policy statement, or regional, is it a regional coastal policy statement? To what extent does that provide an opportunity to make what you're just talking about somewhat less fraught with difficulty?
I'll just quickly answer Joe, which will make her really scared. So any regional coastal policy statement has to align to the national coastal policy statement, which does specifically exclude new hard structures from being within the coastal area. So we can't trump that by doing something within region. So there is already rules around this nationally that we then have to align with as well. Unless Joe's going to say they have changed.
Through you, Chair, I would just add the national direction does provide a slightly different pathway if you're protecting infrastructure that's of national or regional significance. So it's not quite as black and white when it comes to state highways, for example. If you were protecting a private property, then that's a different.
Thank you both, Mr. Wilson and Ms. Noble. And maybe later when Ms. Stewart has her presentation, because the work around Turiha Point is specifically mentioned in one of our papers today, we can ask Ms. Stewart a little more about it and the timeframes. I'd like to thank you for coming today, Marcus, to bring it to our attention again. I know you presented to EPNR years ago on the fact that we were losing that coastline, and it is really important that we all understand the vulnerability and the fact we've lost a lot of freedom camp. Well, it's actually not freedom camping area, it is day trippers area that's gone as well.
It's very close to town. But I just get very frustrated when we don't hesitate to protect the road, but somehow the other land doesn't qualify for the same treatment, which I find rather bizarre in many respects and very frustrating, especially when you've got a valuable asset. We've got along the Puawa, there's a QE2, which is another gift from the family trust, which is next borders onto the Urupa.
Thank you.
Just the others to understand, we have spoken about and where all those rock wall being put in. The chap Henare Green was subcontract to Fulton. He did all that work, but it didn't go around anywhere near to any point. It's had, if anything, very little work on it. So I'm pleased to read in the report, Waka Kotahi, putting some attention on.
Well, I mean, you've seen, as you've seen from those photographs, which was the last couple of days, things are happening and they can happen incredibly quickly. Anyway, I'll
Thank you very
leave you.
much. Thank you for coming, and you'll hear from us what the report said.
I might have to scream again sometimes.
Yes, I'm sure you will. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we move to extraordinary business. I've had no requests, no notice of motion, no adjourned business. And the first paper on our agenda at page 13 is the road safety penalties review. I guess that's an internal paper. Ms. Knight, are you going to present the paper for us?
I wasn't going to talk about anything in particular other than just to raise that the reason this paper is on the table, and you wouldn't have seen it in the governance work plan prior to this, was because it was in response to some correspondence that we received from Auckland Transport about whether we would join them in advocating to the government for, I guess, prioritising the review around the fines and infringements penalties. So just wanted to flag that.
Would you like to join us at the table, because it is really hard to hear over the top of that air conditioning. It seems to be making a lot of noise today. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. Sorry, but the air conditioner is making a big noise. Thank you. Councillor Worsnop.
Okay, so my question I'd like to hear, please, from staff, given all the other stuff that we've got on at the moment, do they consider this to be a priority worthy of devoting staff time to, given that it's probably the first time that it's been brought to our attention and it hasn't actually come from our own community?
I guess the short answer is we've probably got a lot of other more important kaupapa on at the moment.
Thank you. That was what I expected to hear.
Do other councillors have any questions with respect to it?
On
Councillor
page
Burdett.
15, item 4, the framework provides a set of principles and a systemic approach to support the process of setting more consistent and appropriate financial penalty levels across the three transport modes, land, maritime and aviation. Is that really the business of this committee?
No, I think that's what councillor Worsnop's alluding to as well. Can I invite councillor Worsnop to make a recommendation on page 14?
Yeah, I'm happy to recommend that we take no action.
You'd move that, councillor Worsnop.
Yeah.
Councillor Burdett will second it. Does anyone round the table wish to have a conversation or add a contribution to this paper or this decision? Councillor Cranston?
The only thing I thought while I was reading it was it seemed to be in conflict between whether we were finding for safety concerns or we were trying to work out how to get people in a position that they were able to pay their fines. It seemed to be quite bizarre to me. So I think, yeah, I think,
They're both.
yeah, but yeah, I understand why you would look at it that way with the inequities and people that are being fined and that, but it just seemed bizarre the way it was coming through the paper that, you know, one half of it you're sort of saying you should put the fines up so people are safer, and then the other part you're saying, well, how can we get them to pay these fines and enable them to pay them?
Thank you. Unless there's opposing view, and I can't see one being indicated, the recommendation is that the Regional Transport Committee confirm that the committee wish to take no action. And we're adopting A. It's been moved by councillor Worsnop, seconded by councillor Burdett. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean. So we move to our Regional Land Transport Plan and the annual monitoring report at page 94. Thank you. Quite a comprehensive paper that's got a lot of information in it.
Yeah, I won't go into the detail for fear of missing out some really important success story that is in the paper, but I guess the attachment one just kind of illustrates, gives an overview for the committee of all the work that has been going on this year, and that's in the face of some challenges around obviously COVID-19 disruptions. We've had a number of different flooding events and extra emergency works added to the work program as well. Yeah, and this information does include some parts of Waka Kotahi's updates, but they also have some extra ones in their update later on as well. Might just leave it at that unless there's
The questions with respect to the paper to Ms. Knight. I'll start the ball rolling while people look for their questions. On 32 and 33 on page 100, we have New Zealand's first adaptation plan, and I wondered whether council's got any intention to share that with any of the community, our communities.
in terms of the national adaptation plan, communicating some of the
Yes.
things that the
And how that-
responsibilities coming to
How
council.
that will impact on our communities and the work that
Yeah.
Mr. Council's obliged to do.
Yeah, so at the moment, we're obviously looking through the plan and pulling out those bits and doing the, I guess, putting together some more information about that. And we would be wanting to pull that through into the LTP process in terms of connecting that to, you know, I guess the practical actions and the potential budgets that may be associated with that.
And would the communities be consulted on the degree to which they want to see budget attributed to things like that, when we've got a lot of other work unfunded?
Yeah, so as it would be in the long-term plan process, it would be, yeah, up for public consultation.
Thank you. Obviously, it's a report that's made many eyes glaze over by the look of it. Councillor Worsnop.
No, I just need to find all my notes, sorry. So my first note that I've made is just the fact that probably we're using some things that are a little bit out of date, given
Page, please.
on 103, and I think it's possibly come out of the our consultation with the long-term plan, but where we're still making reference to cruise ships, which haven't obviously happened in a very long time, and I think possibly we might be due for a bit of an update on that infographic. But further through, I think one of my main comments was really around how difficult the report was to read in terms of the monitoring components. And I'll kind of start on page 138, where we're comparing, or we're trying to monitor steadily decreasing annual total of deaths and serious injuries. And obviously it's got our starting measures, it's got the quarter breakdown, the average total, like it's not like you really got to read the hell out of this to actually track whether or not we're doing well. And I think there must be an easier way of presenting it so that, you know, possibly for the annual report, it's not necessarily that important to have the quarterly results because we get those quarterly. Actually, you could summarize it down to, you know, are we on target? Oh no, look, we've got more or less, or yes, we are on target. And that kind of, there's some here that don't even provide a measurement against the targets, which makes it, again, really hard. I know you guys have been pretty swamped with loads of other stuff, but if it's going to come in an annual report, I think we do need to be able to actually monitor it. So the things that I can take out of the report, probably there's two take-home messages. The first is that our mode shift is getting off track, possibly worse rather than better. We're now at under 5% people walking and cycling, where I think according to the previous reports, it's been 6%. And the people using our bus service has also not recovered and certainly doesn't seem to be anywhere near where we want it to be. And then, what have I got here? Just give me 2 seconds. Oh, and obviously, this will come as absolutely no surprise to anybody, but our road closures are wildly off track. And that's mirrored obviously with the satisfaction surveys. It's probably surprising that anyone is satisfied. There are satisfied people according to this. That is quite remarkable. So
It's where the headline council was, not.
apologies, but clearly road closures have been probably the takeout of this whole report is the road closures have absolutely ballooned to massive proportions. Possibly have we ever seen them this bad would be my question to staff.
Through you, Chair, so there's a couple of things in there if I can just answer around the public transport. There is the public transport review that is underway at the moment that the team are looking into. How do we provide public transport for Gisborne urban area and what that looks like going forward? And we've been working with Waka Kotahi around our public transport review, the buses, the fare box recovery, all of those things. It's just not working here in Tairāwhiti. So we've been working with Waka Kotahi around what is a different way to actually move people out of vehicles. And what does a better service look like that better suits our community and where they want to go, at what times that they want to go and how they want to get there as well. In regards to roads, Councillor Worsnop, I suppose there's road close for us. We actually think we're doing better than we have ever done before when it comes to road closures. And the example I keep giving back to is we've had road closures in the last rain events. We lost in 2018, over a third of the network went down. So 680 roads were out. In the last event we had, we were not even into, I think 40 roads were out and they were back on again quite quickly. So we now talk in issues on the network. We talk about where we've got one lane closed. We talk about those sort of things. Granted, we've still got roads that we've got issues with. However, we're not talking a third of the network being out. So the road network is, we think, in a better condition because we're able to open it up faster, but also the fact that we're not shutting it down for as long as we used to.
It's not possible to gauge that from the report because we've got obviously our starting measures here, 33 closures on 146. And I mean, I appreciate what you're telling us. It's obviously information that you have, but it's not information that's in the report. So possibly we need to find a way of capturing what you're telling us in a way that is easier for us to monitor.
So through the chair, the difference is between financial years. We have so many events, we get to test these quite often. So this is the 21-22. I'm talking the 22-23 financial year where we've got a difference already in the roads resilience that's coming forward. So you'll see it in next year's annual reporting, and it is around as we're looking at it and as we're working to reopen parts of the network, how we're doing that. So for the 21-22, those are the closures that were there. For 22-23, given that we're 2 months into it, I won't say anything else because we've still got a long way to go, but we are noticing that we're seeing with the contractors, we're able to open at least for access far easier than what we have in the past for the local roads.
Thank you. Councillor Cranston, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Stewart.
Got a few things there. Crawford Road's finished now, and it says in the report that once it's finished, it'll be straight on to Titirangi mowing it. Is that happening? I haven't been up there for a while.
Through the chair, we've been working on Titirangi for a while, so we've had site works up in the top. They've been working from the systems in place up to the summit at the moment. They're now working on the far side, so down to the Incliff Road side. That work's been underway. We've slowed some of that down over winter, just given the stability issues and those things, but the team have been cracking on through Titirangi. So
And that's specifically cycleway, is it? Cycle walkway, or is it? I know there's other work going on up there.
So through the chair, the Titirangi work that's at the moment is the one wang of Titirangi, which has a dedicated car lane and then a walking and cycle lane separated that runs up through and separated by some stick barriers and some painting on the road as you go over the top of the moment.
Thank you. And the other thing is with the funding we've just approved for Taruhiru, I'm just wondering if we've got specifics about what we might do with that. My personal desire would be to choose something that we could start and finish rather than have it sort of go into a partial project. So thinking about that, I think Jason's been doing a bit of work on this, but yeah, just want some clarity about how that may be used and whether it might be for something that we can finish off.
So through the chair, we have a paper going to the chief executive around the options for Taruhiru and which parts we're able to complete with the funding that we have available. And then we'll make a decision. She'll make a decision from there, and we'll look at how we're going to do that. But it very much is around scoping the pieces that we can do for the budget that's available, but also to deliver within the timeframes that we have available as well.
And just the charts on the proximity to schools. It's just a comment really. I mean, the proximity of schools for children to get to school in 10 to 15 minutes was a huge percentage of the students. Yet I'm sure the parents spend 10 to 15 minutes driving them to school the same distance. So yeah, it's just the ongoing concern there. So the sooner we do get Taruhi up and riding and they have got no excuse not to bike to school, the better. And the last thing's on the project update. So note on page 165, there's project forecast variance from a project that was forecast to be 1.6 million. The variance is 2.33 million and the whole project, so the whole project doubles. And when I go back, there's another project forecast a couple of pages back, which is 32 million, but it hasn't got a variance next to that. So just wondering if that doubles and, you know, yeah, I know it's hard to forecast the absolutes, but very surprised to see it more than double when it comes out. So the two I'm talking about, pages 163 and 165.
Do the council officers wish to respond to that, please?
That's a Waka Kotahi project.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, right. Would you like to speak to that when we come to it, Mr. Stewart? You were going to. Right, thanks, Councillor Cranston. Anything further?
No, that's it, thanks.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry, this was
Sorry.
Councillor Stewart who asked to speak to this topic anyway, to this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Probably picking up on Councillor Worsnock's commentary, the report, but also as well on the closures. I think I've got to commend you for the fullness of the report and the detail that's in there, and as well some of the great insights that are provided. And it's great to see how it's reflecting in activating parts of the community as well. One thing that I think perhaps we can help with too is when we're looking at the measuring and monitoring, the insights that could be helpful from that for our programme of work. So what is working well that's helping us to achieve some of these, and what perhaps do we need to give a little bit more discussion around this table to for changes that might need to be made, so that we can understand the impact of our actions against the outcomes that we're seeing. And I'm thinking, like in the road closure one, we can certainly provide some insights into what's causing those road closures. So is it a crash versus is it a big slip, or is it trees down? What is it and where are they happening, so that we can begin to then use that to inform our decision making, but also as well thinking about the timing of this discussion, how we consider developing the next RLTP too. So might just see how we could provide a bit of support into the format and the insights just on the measuring and monitoring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Worsnop.
Sorry, I didn't quite get all my notes. I missed one at the bottom. So just with regards to the financial report, I think, financial performance, starting page 150. Just I note that, and it's not unexpected, in fact, there was no choice but to have this as a feature. I know a lot of our various different categories there have next to them the comment used to fund additional emergency works, first response works. I just want to get an understanding, do we sum total that to find out how much needed to be diverted out of various different things to fund the emergency works? Are you able to give us, I suppose, the figure, and do I interpret it correctly when I look at something like unsealed pavement maintenance, which had 1.46 million next to it? We delivered 891,949, and obviously there's a big chunk that had to be used for emergency works. Do I take it to that to mean that that gap is therefore needing to be spent next year? How do we catch up with this?
So through you, Madam Chair, when we move things across, it comes through in finance and audit. The spends there are where we've already got funding from either the RLTP, PGF, and or emergency work. So it's normally when, if I take, say, the Marta Road, for example, the 8K mark, it was already due to be done. Then it breaks, we have to fix it. There's no point double counting and fixing it twice. So we take that out because we've actually done it under emergency works on those roads to bring them back up. So it's the same piece. We get ordered by Waka Kotahi so that we can't just move money around. It has to be spent on that stretch of road, but also we can't say we've done emergency works, then claim for maintenance works as the funding of that as well. So where you see those, it's because we've either done it to fund work that could not wait for construction season, so we've had to get in and get it done, and it's been put in. So it's not an underspend, it's we've gone and spent it under emergency works, but we can't double count it.
Just again, just a bit of a plea. We've got a heading. Can the heading be on every page? Because we have 7 pages to that financial performance. And up to the top, find out what you're looking at. So thank you very much. That was.
Can I just follow up? Thank you, Councillor Worsnop. On Fund 52, in response to Mr. Wilson's response, but we've looked at environmental maintenance, which I, again, like Councillor, you have to write, if you've got a hard copy, you have to write the headings on all the pages so I can see what I'm reading. It seems like that we have spent all of that money on emergency work and first response work. So we've done no environmental maintenance. And yet the figure in the LTP was 2 million. And we spent 1.4. So are we going to expect to get that work done next year out of the money maybe Kotahi is going to give us that we've had to already spend?
So through you, Madam Chair, we worked through a reconciliation with Waka Kotahi around what was programmed, what we've had to do. Environmental maintenance is a wide category for the $2 million that's there. It's anything from tree pruning right through to some spraying. There's a number of things that are in there. So some of the funding we have had to underspend so that we were able to keep under our budgets, given the significant overspend we would have had last year if we had spent all of these budgets as well. So some of these very much were deliberately underspent to make sure that we kept in on budget when we got to the end of financial year. But this will be covered in detail when we have our end of year financial reporting.
Thank you, appreciate that. Councillor Budi, you had a question?
I do have a question, but I think this needs to be said publicly, and I'm just relating to what David said earlier about our own network. Between him, he's the head honcho, and the staff and the contractors, to date, they've, in my view, on the parts of the network I've been on, they've done a marvelous job. The only criticism I can make, and it's positive, is the culvert team, whoever they are, must be under a hell of a lot of stress, because there are areas of the network that, in terms of the culverts, have been tended to. But aside from that, I think our guys have done a great job.
Thank you, Councillor Budi. I'm sure Mr. Wilson and his team will be really pleased to hear that. Can I go to page 109 and just ask, I wonder if Mr. Lyons has picked this up. I see in June 2022 on page 109, your spreadsheet, we've got 600,000 for walking and cycling at Uruawa. Has that been spent, and where is it at the moment? It's lined out there for June 2022. Is that waiting? Is still available?
So this one is not necessarily about spend. This is just meant to give a bit of an illustration of the projects and I guess start and finish dates, and the amounts there are the amounts tagged to the projects as opposed to necessarily the spends. But I will perhaps explain that a little bit better when we use it again.
So supplementary to that, that's still available for the spend on the Uruawa walking and cycleway then. Thank you. That's great. Thanks very much. There's some comment around on page 112 and around the annual report, and I did touch on this at our pre-meeting. We're talking about how we get information over, because it is challenging, there's no question about it, and probably the biggest criticism we get is about the state of our roads. And so below the photograph, we've got 3 paragraphs talking about our ongoing issues on the roading network and our online team updating our roading information page. And it seemed to me there's a lot of really good information in this, and I did suggest to the Chief Executive on the pre-meeting that Mr. Wilson wasn't able to be on, that we could share some of this more widely through the Gisborne Herald and through other mechanisms, not just online, because it's great to have it online, but I can honestly tell you that a very large chunk of our population does not go online to read about the state of our roads. They might go online to find out a piece of information around their resource consent or something. But if we need to get this information into the public domain, it may help people to understand the efforts that council officers go to try to keep our roads open. And there's good information. I mean, a lot of these graphs and potholes filled in July, many people would not have access to that level of information. And even the repairs to the substantial dropouts that we've got on some of our internal roads. I'm sure we could do a good job sharing this information in a written form, hard copy form in the media. I'd like to see us try to do that.
So just to update you on that, Madam Chair, the Chief Executive has discussed that with us, and the team are putting together how we will report against the roading performance to date, where our programs are, and tying that in with the annual report release that will be coming out soon. So we'll be talking about the transport, what's been achieved, what the forward work program is, but trying to make sure we get that in with the annual report, which also has a significant comms approach to it as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so is there any further queries or comments? And thank you, Mr. Gaddam.
No, I can't help but pick up on the pool access. So the stage 2 consents have been submitted. We've now got a kuta that's going to be built up behind the port as well. So quite a substantial new school going in up there by the look of it. I hope that is now going to move up the list, Linda, and we're going to get some movement on that project, because that intersection's obviously already overcooked, and then we've got all this other stuff coming. So just interested in where that is
I can make some introductory comments and then Sarah may want to give a bit of colour or not to it, but certainly we've received the resource consent and that's being worked through by our team right now, and that does activate us to then bring back out the port access business case. So yes, in short. Anything you want to add?
Thank you for raising that, Adam. Any further queries or questions around this really substantial annual report? If there's not, do I have a mover for the accept move by councillor Burdett? I'm just looking for that. 94. It is a noting report. Note the contents of this report has been moved by councillor Burdett. Is there a seconder? Thank you, councillor Cranston. No further questions? Then, yes, sure.
I think it's worthwhile acknowledging it's probably been a very stressful year for our voting team. And in particular, probably been the most challenging year when you combine a whole series of factors. So the fact that they are still standing and our roads are still passable, albeit we are obviously waiting with bated breath to find out whether or not we were going to get some aid in that regard. Really, I think it's probably worthwhile just acknowledging the work that's gone in to get us through the other side of winter. It is officially spring. You can start to breathe a sigh of relief that things are going to get better. I haven't just cursed us, I promise. So thank you on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, councillor Borsnott. So I'll put that, it is a noting report. It moved councillor Burdett, seconded councillor Cranston. All those note, we note the content of the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. So we move to page 166, and that's Kotahi's National Emission Reduction Plan update.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
I'd
Thank
like
you, Ms.
to
Nye.
ask our colleague Lisa Muldy to join us. Lisa is a principal transport planner for the Central North Island. We've had some very high level discussions at the RTC around emissions reduction, what we can do as a region when we consider climate change, the impact that it's having on the community. And Lisa's agreed and proactively sought to come along subsequent to meetings with officers to begin to help us unpack what the emissions reduction plan actually means in a more practical sense, what it means in terms of things like vehicle kilometres travelled and targets, but as well to begin our own thinking as a committee on how we need to begin to consider investment priorities and planning for our next RLTP period. So it's a bit to get us in the right mindset and begin to start thinking about the kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves about our investment into the transport system right across the region. So I'll pass over to Lisa.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for having me today, and I'm happy to speak to this topic. Yes, thanks for the introduction, Linda. And essentially, I just want to be sure that you're receiving the same information that we're passing on at the officer level. I believe this is going to be a hot topic going into the future and for a long time to come. And we want to be upfront and transparent with the information that we have so far, and just acknowledge that this is the beginning of a conversation and there will be plenty more information to come. So just to paint the strategic context for you a bit, this is the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework, which we've used as the framework for our work going forward in this space. There's three ways in which we intend to reduce our transport emissions. So firstly, it's avoiding emissions by reducing the need to travel. Secondly is shifting travel to low impact modes. And lastly is improving efficiency in vehicles. The VKT reduction component consists of avoid and shift, because we won't be able to achieve the co-benefits of improved health, improved safety and livability in our communities simply by shifting to more efficient vehicles. So the transport emission reduction target is a 41% reduction by 2035. These 3 bullet points speak to our focus areas. That first one really focused on that avoidance. Oh, sorry. The first one really speaking to that avoid and shift component, and some of the ways that we can get there through integrated land use planning, development and transport planning investments to reduce emissions, and investigating other pricing and demand management tools to reduce transport emissions, such as parking pricing. And then also acknowledging that roadway expansion and investments in new highways will need to be consistent with the transport targets. So when we're talking about road infrastructure investments, we will need to understand the VKT and transport emission component of those pieces of work. We need to do all that we can to reduce that. So what does this mean for Gisborne and Tarafiri? I just kind of wanted to give you a lay of the land for the upcoming few years. Currently, there are regional VKT reduction targets that are being set by MOT, and that will be finalized by around the end of the year. As you can see, there's also just quite a bit of work going on the ground at Gisborne District Council with the Streets for People projects, the PT review, the public transport plan. So there is an opportunity to start integrating VKT and transport emission reduction and mode shift into these pieces of work. One great thing that we're really happy to see is the Te Tarawhiti walking, cycling and mode shift strategy. That's to be commended to be looking at that piece of work to really put council in a good position to have projects to build that pipeline for when those funding opportunities come up. And then in 2023, we will have a revised national mode shift plan that will be published by the end of June. And so for those of you who might be familiar with it, the national mode shift plan, Keeping Cities Moving, will be revised with the addition of VKT reduction being integrated into that. And then pretty quickly, we'll be moving into the next RLTP process. So this is a great opportunity for us to start laying the groundwork to set you up heading into the next RLTP, particularly with the new GPS coming out at the beginning of next year. And really what it comes down to is everyone will be doing their part. As you can see across the board, each one of our communities is having targets set for reduction. That includes all the tier 1, tier 2s, and the rest of New Zealand is included in there as well. So this means people need to be traveling differently for some trips some of the time. It also requires us not only to progress the quick and easy wins, but we'll also have to think about when to roll out measures that may be a bit more challenging down the road. And so, for example, if you look at places like maybe your Hastings, they're looking at a 16% reduction in VKT by 2035, which is actually right around the corner if you look at our RLTP funding cycles. But the great thing is that DDC is already taking action. So you do have some work that's been put into place with your climate change mitigation work. So you have a draft emissions reduction plan, and we really expect that this mode shift and VKT reduction component will simply add granularity to your climate change aspirations that you're building currently. So some of the work that you already have underway is increasing the use of bikes and electric scooters, incentivizing various forms of flexible working and things along those lines. I do just want to note that these actions are subject to the council endorsement once that's finalized. And we're more than happy to work with the team to help guide some of those actions around transport. And then there's also a Tarawhiti-wide planning that's happening for an equitable transition and decarbonization. So some of those low hanging fruit activities that can really start building some momentum. So how do we get there? You may have heard of some of these funding streams recently, in particular, the Transport Choices Package, which is that first bullet point. That's really for rapid rollout of on the ground walking and cycling infrastructure, public transport infrastructure, so we can start building a more supportive environment. The next piece is that VKT reduction planning, which I touched on briefly. So we'll have that national VKT reduction plan. The tier 1 cities will be next in line to have reduction plans pulled together. And then tier 2, they will be finished by the end of 2024. By the end of that time, I would envision that we would have quite a good idea as to what the evidence base is for those pieces of work and what will land well in communities. And the intent is really to work alongside those communities to understand what a good plan might look like for you. And so I think that there's probably some lessons learned in some of that work as we progress it. But as you can see, this is 1.5 billion in the Climate Emergency Response Fund money coming through just for this round. And it covers a whole range of measures and interventions that will be rolled out. This is the very first emission reduction plan, and this is the very first round of SURF money. So there will be subsequent ERPs, subsequent SURF contributions to this work. This does run in parallel to the NLTP, so the funding is separate, comes from the emission trading scheme. But essentially, that's kind of where we are currently. It's at a very high level, but we're building the plane while we're flying a little bit. So there's a bit of more information that will be coming over the upcoming months.
Fascinating. Open to the floor. Thank you very much. We're not shooting the messenger.
Please.
I shouldn't say that. Well, I might have a go at the moment. I'm giving you all the opportunity first. Councillor Cranston.
Is there a rationale to the 41%? Was that determined to be a doable percentage, or what's the rationale? Why 41%?
That's a government target. So I would assume that it's evidence-based, and I would actually say the Ministry of Transport reduction targets that they're currently working on have a complete evidence base behind them, a research base. So yeah, the VKT reduction targets in particular are tailored towards looking at the growth that we're experiencing, what's happening on the ground, the population, and the opportunities. So I anticipate as we progress through that national VKT reduction plan, that will continue to be an evidence-based piece of work. And so the initiatives that are pulled out of that will have that proven effectiveness.
Thank you.
Questions from the floor, or questions from our advisors? Councillor Worsnop.
Okay, so this is interesting. But I'm struggling to reconcile. So all that's the big stuff in the list is all providing opportunities, but you can't physically, like 20% is a lot of mode shift. It's a hell of a lot. It's a huge amount for a region that a quarter of us are rural. And in light of the fact that the petrol price got over $3 and the government cut the fuel price by removing taxes, I don't see how there's any way of pushing people out of their cars into this amazing public transport that will be available if we have no appetite for fuel to be dearer.
I can't speak to the fuel component of that, but there are ways to shift behaviors. A great example that we have out of the Hawke's Bay DHB, for example, is they had a travel plan that they rolled out. So it's a comprehensive package of carrots and sticks. So providing that supportive environment, for example, by having secure bike parking, aligning the public transport service with shift start times, and also they fully subsidize public transport for all of their staff and patients. And they experience an 18% mode shift in just 2 years through that program. So that gives an indication that in a regional setting, you can actually achieve quite significant mode shift, particularly when you pull those levers and use the tools that you have to make it easier to walk and cycle and more challenging to drive and park. And that is simply a request of getting people to think about traveling differently for some trips some of the time. A 10% mode shift can be achieved on your commute alone if you travel differently once a fortnight.
That does presume that you can. And I think that's I note obviously the different targets. Clearly, it's aligned fairly closely with the regionality of those locations, which makes a lot of sense. But I noticed also in your first box where you've got the three focus areas, certainly the first one seemed to really be saying we need to urbanize our population so that we all live closer to work. And while that does make a lot of sense in terms of walking and cycling, it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of housing, because we have big challenges already. I guess my question is how synchronized, because I know enough about politics to know that silos tend to be the favored means of operating. How much does this strategy interact with things like where our development is going to be, because it's a very complicated picture to draw together, and if it's not drawn together, it simply won't happen.
I think it would be safe to say that when you look at the GPS and when you look at the policy for urban development alongside the ERP, there is work for our various ministries and the government to do to bring them together. What I would say is, though, that at a cross-government agency level, a lot of that work is happening on the ground. So we have regular meetings with our partners, the likes of Karakia, or MSD, around how we can ensure that where possible, achieving collective outcomes that are there for the community. But they're certainly at a policy level further work to do on that. They're pulling hard to achieve their own objectives at the moment.
I was just gonna say more specifically, for example, Karakia has a sustainable transport outcomes framework that they're using in all of their development, for example. And I know that they're really having a look at where they're placing those developments. And so there are ongoing conversations for sure, but there is also a lot of cross-pollination across the work we're doing.
Councillor Birdie, I'll come back to you, Councillor.
Well, this is a bit of a revelation. How much of that stuff is reality? But I have a question, which I picked up on, and this includes David and his staff. Will he be riding a bike to work in future? That's what it said.
A push bike at that.
Are you telling that side?
That hurts. Through you, Madam Chair, Council has a progressive fleet purchasing where we have got more EVs, we've got more vehicles where they're fit for purpose. The issue we have with EVs is obviously with journeys, with a lot of the teams that actually work, I think Kerry Hudson and those guys in integrated catchments, there's no vehicle that can actually do what they need to be able to do. So there's no EV with the range or the four-wheel drive capability or clearance on the market, and there won't be for a number of years yet, unfortunately for us.
Say, Madam Chair, it's in a jocular vein, and I was being facetious.
This is a serious question. I'd like to ask how much consideration was given for rural provincial New Zealand, because it's fine to tell us what Waka, Kotahi are doing, I beg your pardon, Karakia are doing, and most of us in this councillors in the room sat through their presentation and they don't think their tenants need car parks and a whole lot of other things, and they can walk upstairs without lifts. So what consideration for rural New Zealand, and much of our population here is rural, and to have a 20% reduction in light vehicle fleet, and I'm sure our heavy transport operators will have some comment to make about a 35% reduction in the heavy vehicle emissions in 2035, which is only 12 years ago, 12, maybe 13 if you want to stretch it, years away. How much consideration for rural New Zealand has been given in this package?
Yeah. So there's a few things to tackle there. I was just going to say, firstly, I'm based here in the Central North Island, and I work primarily in provincial communities and understand the challenges that are faced on the ground here. In reference to the heavy vehicles, that's a separate target on its own. What we were talking about today was simply light VKT reduction. So those are your commuter traffic, your trips around town. Heavy vehicles and freight decarbonization is a separate work stream and is being discussed with, yeah, it is part of the emission reduction package. However, the avoid, shift, improve, the VKT reduction component is really specific to what I was speaking about, was about those daily trips that people are making by car. So yeah, I would agree. You would see there's a reason why there wasn't smaller communities listed on that list. All the rest of New Zealand was a very small piece in the corner. There is an understanding that there isn't a huge urbanization in rural communities. So some of it is really just taking steps in the right direction, providing a bit more of a supportive environment and shifting the trips that we can, knowing that EVs will play a role and decarbonizing the fleet will have a role to play more in rural communities than the urban communities. So yeah, those tier 1 cities such as Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch are doing the heavy lifting, but it doesn't get everyone else off the hook. It means we all just need to do a bit of thinking about how we can travel differently.
I have a couple of further questions. What is a social leasing scheme which has got 20 million beside?
Yeah, I don't know if that's been worked out. You're welcome to speak to that.
I can give a bit of insight, but currently the advice is still going from ourselves to MOT and through to the Minister on the details of both that package and the car scrapping package. But there have been some pilot schemes around that in Manukau and South Auckland, for example. And it's a way to, we're looking at all of the different levers we can pull. And one of the big things that we can pull is getting people into lower emissions vehicle as opposed to older, higher emissions vehicles. But that comes at a cost. Not everybody can afford a 5-star all singing, all dancing vehicle. So both the car scrappage is a way to get older vehicles off the road and replace them with newer vehicles. And there is potentially subsidies available for that. And similarly, the leasing scheme is looking at communities that would benefit from financial support through leases to help them access better quality cars in terms of safety and also emissions. But that's still getting the finer details pushed through at the moment. It's something that we're currently in discussions with around opportunities for Tairāwhiti specifically internally at the moment.
Thank you. And I have a further question. The 27 million that's available for half-price bus fares, I don't think that's available in Tairāwhiti, is it? I don't know where it is available. It's in other parts of New Zealand. And we have trouble getting people on buses anyway. And I see there's an intent to potentially make all bus travel free. Screen. Who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, it
would have to be.
So any policy around pricing with bus fares would have to be a national policy. So you wouldn't be able to have one rule for Auckland and one rule for Tairāwhiti, for example. So whatever the policy set on that would have to be consistent across the board, because people travel on buses wherever they go, so they need to have a consistent experience.
Sure. So is some of this hypothetical then? I mean, it's not in place now. The 27 million is available for half-price bus fares.
I don't believe that it's hypothetical. I believe, as to Lisa's point, some of the details post the announcement and the funding allocation have yet to be worked through.
So when do you expect these kind of things to become operational?
Well, for example, the transport choices is on a very, very short timeline of decisions made by the end of September. So some of them are at the short and pointy end, and others are requiring a more substantive look at policy. So it could be towards the end of the year before we get any real clarity. The one thing I would say is that overall for the timeline for what's been announced is quite short in terms of its implementation.
Thank you. Well, it's really interesting for a large geographical and very sparsely populated rural area. It certainly presents some problems. And thank you for the example that like GDC is doing good work here, because we can manage and control the initiatives that we have. And you've discussed Hawke's Bay Healthcare, who again can manage and control an element. And of course, they'll create an incentive for those who need to use healthcare. So they're really audience, if you like, is going to be a lot different for a very sparsely populated population, I think. We need, we ask that Waka Kotahi think about that in the design of whatever comes out next, please.
I might also add, I was just going to say, your public transport plan is really looking at a step change in your PT service. And so those are the types of shifts that we're looking for, because part of the low uptake is often because the bus doesn't go where people want to go when they want to go. And your service will provide an increased level of meeting people's needs and competition with private vehicles.
I'm sure that's absolutely true, but I've been around this table long enough to remember, and it wasn't that long ago that we did a bus review and we consulted with our public about where do they want the buses and when do they want them. And I don't think that the mayor's acknowledging that it's not that long ago, probably 5-6 years, and our population using buses has got less.
But I think when we last consulted was we streamlined the services then to make sure we included some of the retirement villages, but we did communicate well with our community. And then even after we changed that roster, if sometimes you change something and there are unintended consequences. So we even fine-tuned it a little bit after that as well. So our community are quite involved with that as well. And it's an important link to lots of people in our community to use the buses.
Adam, are you wanting to comment? Thank you,
Yeah.
Your Worship.
So 1.5 billion, is that funded, firstly, is it funded going to be funded out of petrol tax, or are we borrowing more money for that? And I guess from a regional perspective, there's a huge risk for us for all the points that have been made around the table, right? As you look at New Zealand as the main centres and things, but everybody out in the regions where we rely heavily on individualised modes of transport, because we just don't have any choice. And you don't have to actually go too far out of town before that starts happening, even in the lifestyle blocks on the edge of the city here. So there's a real risk from a central government perspective that they make a policy decision that, yeah, it might fit with the metropolitan areas, but will have a hugely, well, the carbon farm, I think, to be quite frank, will have a huge detrimental effect on the regions like Gisborne or Wanganui or Wairarapa or anywhere really. It's I'm just interested in the thinking around how that ultimately looks, really around how it's going to be funded, because it's coming out of the Climate Emergency Fund. But I'm just wondering where that funding is coming from. Is it ultimately going to come out of the petrol tax?
As I mentioned in the presentation, the Climate Emergency Response Fund is funded by the Emissions Trading Scheme. So those that are creating pollution are putting funding into that. And that's an ongoing fund.
Because that ETS is going to tax the fuel.
I might just make kind of a few broader comments, and I'll come back to the funding one, which is critical. I don't think any of us would disagree that this kind of shift is needed right across the country, and we just saw some of the impacts that the region is facing due to climate change. I think the question is the rate of change and its applicability to different communities. So it's going to look and feel very different if you're on Key Road in Auckland to if you're in Uawa, for example. But I think we would all agree that things need to change, and it's the ability to do it in the pace that that happens. And as Lisa showed, we've all had the opportunity, local government as well as agencies like ourselves, to inform the ERP. And that's why you've seen that the big cities are doing the heavy lifting, but also cities like Hastings or Pami are having to pick up their share as well. But what we can't do is just say that everybody else can carry on as per, because there is definitely things that in your beautiful city here that can be changed. And things as well in rural communities in terms of the types of vehicles that are being driven and the infrastructure required to support that, be it light vehicles or in the future heavy vehicles, will need to adapt. I think what we're seeing here is the desire for government to be making some change and making some change where they can very quickly, but allowing other parts of the country to change over time. And that's why actually the avoid, shift, improve is a really good way to look at it, because Auckland will be able to do things much faster, but we'll need time here to begin to prepare our communities and our businesses for that. the funding is a wicked issue for the land transport system in its entirety. I think we've got to commend that this is not coming out of the National Land Transport Fund and that it is coming out of the emissions trading scheme. Will that continue forever? Probably not. That will move to, I would say, a hybrid model, but we have to look at that off the back of currently our funding system is being reviewed, because there's many things in here that will impact our revenue stream, and yet we're having to invest in much more. So all I would say is that Ministry of Transport, ministers, Waka, Kotahi, local government, it's the hottest topic at the moment, and your points are 100% valid. But to give you a bit of comfort, we have to make change, but it's going to look and feel different for communities at different stages, I think. But noted. Thank you.
I think while you've picked up on what is clearly quite a lot of alarm with regards to the proposed route, I think a lot of that alarm comes because there's probably not a lot of confidence, particularly in the regions, with regards to the consistency with what the government actually wants and how it's delivered pragmatically on the ground. And I can give you one clear as day example. The easiest people to mode shift are children. And yet we cannot get school buses funded for children. They are the first people who will line up, get on a bus and avoid their parents having to drive them to school. And yet the Ministry of Education does not fund that, and its justification for not funding it, and I was on the Zoom call, was because their parents can drive them. So until the government has its ducks in a row, it's very hard for us to expect that simply what is handed to us as a model is going to just float along beautifully and it's going to deliver us to this utopia. We're critical because we need it to work for the people. We're critical because we need to be able to deliver it in a way that doesn't make everyone poorer. Transport is connected directly to productivity, right? Our ships and railway can certainly play a part, but we need trucks to get into the ships. Those ships are still using fuel. Those trains are still using fuel. You know, we need to have faith in the fact that when we look at a plan, that the plan can be delivered, and it can be delivered while also not killing prosperity. But thank you. That's my rant. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Warsman. Well summed up. Are there any further questions? Can we please have that PowerPoint presentation, because it should be available, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, much appreciated. So is someone prepared to note the contents of that report? Are you moving that, Councillor Purdy? Someone prepared to note? Thank you, Councillor Warsman. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. So, and we move to the paper, the Waka Kotahi update for September 22. Thank you very much, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you. And if I could just make some comments there, thank you very much to Lisa for that. And I think the quality of the interest, the debate and the discussion is where this needs to be. We will have funding to develop plans for this, and that is with you and your community. So it's not an overlay, and I'm under no illusions that we're going to just rock up to utopia smoothly. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll crack into this in the usual format. We've got a few updates from a national perspective, and then some more regional updates. But just first and foremost, I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate the council on their successful application for the accelerated change projects under Streets for People. You'll have noted that the Minister has warmly announced that, and you're one of a great group, of which Central North Island is well represented. Good job, teams. But I think as well, the two projects that have been highlighted here, one in Gisborne and then one out at Uawa, are both critically important to some of what we've just seen, but some of what we've just heard here about safer movement for our communities. So well done to everybody that's been involved in that. It's great to see Gisborne represented there. We will move on. We're going to keep on a bit of an environmental theme. Here, I've mentioned Tomata Tayo in one of our previous updates, but just to keep you in the loop, and this is something to consider as we head into our next RLTP development, we've updated what we call our environmental and social responsibility standards. And that's to reflect the new strategic framework, policies, business practices, that how we better protect our environment as we go through our maintenance, our operations, and building our capital works. Within this, and one of the things that's been updated is what's called the environmental screen. Essentially what that is a checklist of questions that's designed to identify whether the option that you've selected for your maintenance or for your capital projects could have environmental or sustainability impacts, or also opportunities to do things differently. It also as well informs the multi-criteria analysis in the business case process. The screen will also help you identify if there's any other technical assessments that need to be done, and importantly as well, if there are other requirements around stakeholder engagement, so particularly Tangata Whenua, Heritage New Zealand, Department of Conservation. So it's a good prompt to make sure that we're continually improving our processes, which helps us to achieve better outcomes for our environment. So this is something that all officers can have access to into your council as well. The asset management data standards. This is a critically important piece of work for how we work together to manage Aotearoa's assets. It's getting rolled out currently, but in kind of layman's terms, the standard provides us with the structure to get consistency over what data we collect, how we collect it, a common language to describe what we're doing, the service, the impact, the stage of the asset life cycle across all of our collective assets. So it will help us better plan for maintenance, what we need to do proactively as well as reactively, but as well what we want to invest in into the future. So it'll help us to make sure that we decide on an evidence-based method, but as well on a value for money method. This is being rolled out now. We've got a handful of councils coming into this in the Greater Wellington region this year. And everybody will be using this, Waka Kotahi as well, within the next 5 years. Driver license improvements. I've got a bit in the regional update as well, but this is a kind of broader overview. You'll be aware that the Ministry of Transport took to undertake a review of the driver licensing system. And as a result of that, we've embarked on what's called the Driver License Improvement Programme. That was on the request or what came out of the review, but also as well within that for us to look at it not just through a transport or a Waka Kotahi view. We're actually doing this collaboratively with education, with MSD, Te Puna Kōkiri, police, ACC. So we have a much more holistic view of what driver licenses provide your community with, rather than purely a, let's say, a regulatory view of that function. I'll talk a little bit in more detail, but to get some of this underway, because it's not just talking about improvement, what we're doing is doing improvement at the same time. We have 2 trials happening, one in Tairāwhiti and one in Te Taitokoro in Northland. And that's to establish and to test a lot of the feedback that we've had, that we can do this in our communities if you support us. And we need to do it where the people need to access these services. Not everybody, say in Tairāwhiti, can drive to Gisborne for their test or for their services. So how could we do this differently? So I'll touch on that a little bit more on a later slide. But just to reassure you that we really have heard the feedback and we're not just talking about it, we are doing things on the ground. Sarah Hui on Monday doing just that here. And then coastal shipping. So how are we going to achieve some of these emissions reduction targets? What are we doing? I just wanted to, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of, the government policy around all of this, but just to talk a little bit about, this was a fund that was started up it was done in partnership with the commercial sector. So we had the National Road Carriers Association, the Port Company CEO Group, the NZ Shipping Federation, and Waka Kotahi was really the enabler to the commercial sector, actually looking at what would be required to accelerate coastal shipping right around the country. That was a bit of a pun, but you know what I mean. From the fund that came out, we have invested 30 million into these 4 successful applications or bids, and they're now well down the track. And what it in short means is that each of those will have an additional vessel available for coastal shipping purposes. And you'll note there the likes of Move International has been traditionally a road freight company, and they're making that shift much more swiftly into kind of diversifying their operations. Interestingly, they're the Aotearoa Shipping Alliance, you may be aware of. They're actually based down in Westland, and it's a barging opportunity. They're looking at it for aggregates and minerals, but they are as well in discussions here in Tairāwhiti, just with regards to the barging of forestry products, but as well potentially aggregates here on the East Coast. So there's strong links here at the moment developing for Tairāwhiti. But this is the kind of thing that we're looking at as an organisation, and how can we work differently and in a more accelerated way. And quite often it's the commercial guys that can make that happen much faster than the government agencies. They just need our support to be able to do that and to access some of that catalyst funding. We'll trot on to update on the RLTP significant activities. The team continue to work, our teams continue to work together on the walking and cycling and getting some progress there. Don't believe there's any definite progress in accelerating that in this NLTP, but it's still on the radar. The Waka Gorge, that is delayed in terms of getting the business case completed. So the resources that we have applied to that was due to be completed in May have actually been fully absorbed in the emergency response work. So Richard and the team based here in Gisborne have been working much more focused on the State Highway 35 and State Highway 2 response. The business case will be complete by the end of this year. And I think we've had quite regular updates through the 50 Max Bridge, led by Gisborne District Council, and how that's progressing. A little bit of an update here on how we're tracking. And I know this is something our respective teams have been working on together, but just to ensure that as governors, you've got a bit of an update on how we're going post year 1 of this RLTP. Making great progress against budget on your local road maintenance. And things are a little bit slower on the local road improvements, but that's quite often the case in terms of phasing, design work that needs to be done, community engagement, consultation. Also as well, we've got to note that this isn't the only work that your council has to do, so there are capacity and capability constraints to manage as well. But the reason that I want to show it is, one, so you have visibility of how you are tracking year on year, but as well, the next year and the following year could potentially be quite big years for your council team to achieve what we've collectively committed to. But also as well, you know, as we know, and we had a conversation pre this, if you don't use the funding, you don't get to keep it. So it's important that we do wherever possible, make sure that we prioritize the work programme and get what's most important for your community done. Maintenance and renewals seems to be a lot of the time the hottest topic in town. We had a very successful programme in the last construction year, so 21 to 22. Collectively, and just would like to again say thank you for working so collaboratively between the council and ourselves on the asphalting programme, which you can see there. But next year we have an even greater programme of work happening. We're looking at about a 14% renewal and reseal programme of work right across your state highway network. My question to our team is, how confident are we that we can deliver on this? Weather events aside, they've actually taken some really good forward planning steps to try and ensure that we can deliver on what we've committed to doing. And by doing that, we're already, all of the crews, or a lot of the crews that we have coming in from Hawke's Bay or Bay of Plenty, we've got in first for Thai Rafferty. We're the first cab off of the ranks, and the programme will kick off earlier than in the other areas. So we'll be starting here in October. We've managed to secure some additional resources to support that as well. And the team are also looking at efficiencies that can be gained around road closures, traffic management plans as well, so that we do it as efficiently as possible, but with as minimal disruption on your network as possible. So you can see here, this is just, it's quite small actually when you see it up there, but you can see here the number of sites that are happening on reseal, rehab, and the asphalting work across the network right up to the top of the cape there. Next update is on all things 35 and 2, the impact of the severe weather events. Just an update, first of all, on the Motu Rivermouth work. The expectation was for it to be fully open and fully operational by the 5th of September. Wet weather has played a little bit of havoc on the seal that was due to go in. So we haven't quite met that deadline, but we're aiming for the seal to be in and completed by the 9th of September. We're not going to open it straight away to 2 lanes of traffic though. We're going to keep it under traffic management until we're for about 3 to 5 days to make sure that we're comfortable that the seal is going to be holding up. And then it will be open to 2-way traffic after that. Koparoa, the only restriction we have left in place is for trucks and trailers between 7 AM and 7 PM only. That site is continuously monitored during the day to ensure that it is safe and that the road conditions are safe for users. We're also working closely with all house movers who I know have been disrupted by what has happened, to make sure that they can have safe access through Koparoa. The restriction will be in place until further notice, and that's most likely until we've got that retreat complete. So the enabling works have started just at the end of last month. We cleared the trees and we're relocating one of the power poles there. And then the date the main works are due to start, so that is essentially cutting the face further back so we can begin the road retreat. We're just getting final confirmation, but that shouldn't be too far off starting now. So these are what we have termed kind of the critical sites for the network. I've talked about a couple there, the Motu Rivermouth and Koparoa, and also as well Huia Hill, that was already completed mid-August. But also State Highway 2 at Matawai, that was completed and opened in mid-August, but we won't be able to complete the final seal for that stretch until we get better weather at the moment. But right now it's full width, fully stabilized, and will be sealed as soon as we possibly can. And State Highway 35 down at Mangahuini. The rocks have been placed at the bottom of that to support the, I think they call it the toe. That was done to minimize the cracks that you're seeing there getting any worse. Initially, we had planned to retreat the road, but there's a huge amount of work that's gone into stabilizing this and getting the rocks in place. So at the moment, the engineers are just reassessing whether retreat is actually the better option or whether further stabilization of that section of road is a better option. So they've been working really, really hard. I know it feels like at times that the progress is slow, but these are complicated sites for them. An update on all things, excuse me, speed and infrastructure. We have indicated that engagement is planned for 2022 on these speed reviews. But this is something that I would be keen for some feedback from the RTC in the meeting or outside of. We feel that given the extent of the work that's happening on your network and the critical nature of that, is this the right time to be looking at doing speed reviews? Your community and yourselves have got a lot on your plates at the moment. And would it be better to look at a different time to do them?
Yes, please.
I was going to say, I'd also really appreciate feedback though, that are there areas on there outside Marae, Kura, through particular towns and villages where your communities would be crying out, can you come and have a look at the speed here? And actually, are there opportunities to do it in smaller sections as opposed to the full gambit, the full corridor? So that's something that we can do.
I agree with what you just said. I think for our region to try and do an overall rolled out speed review, sometimes have unintended consequences where, you know, don't scratch where there's no itch. So I think your approach where if there is something that's really specific, and I know that can cause disconnect because you really do want to have consistency across the network, but I do want to really endorse what you just said. I'd rather, when there is an issue, that we address it and try a really costly overall review of people or places that don't really are asking to be reviewed and it's working quite well. And then you have a lack of community buy-in or on the consultation because people are not really interested in changing anything. So thank you for that recommendation. I totally support that.
Thank you. So we might revisit that perhaps in one of our catch-ups that our teams do, and also we can revisit that as well. But just an indication that we're not planning to just crack on with this, given everything that you and your community are dealing with, but open to a bit of a further discussion about how and when we might do this. Eastland Port Access, covered this earlier. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. But just to recognise that we do understand the critical nature of this. I had a catch up with the chair and deputy chair and CEO of Eastland Wood Council recently about something else entirely, and they reinforced the importance of this as well. So we'll work through with our planning team the consent application and keep you informed from there. Said I would come back to the driver licensing one. So one thing we have heard the real need to do this differently at a really practical sense as to how we provide access and support for your communities to get their driver license, whatever their age, wherever they're based, whatever their own situation is. We realised as well that the historical way of doing that has been very constrained. So now we are looking at different ways of working, and this is one of the first trials that we've had underway right across the whole country. We have Tairafiti REAP and the McInnes group leading this trial. Around that table we have Waka, Kotahi, MSD, the police as well in support. But it's your community and members of your community through these groups that are shaping this. And that is everything from who the driver testing officers are, where they're based, how they interact with your clients, how they get support through their driver licensing experience, and all the way from learning right through to testing, but also as well where they can undertake their testing too. And that's been one of the big issues that we've experienced, particularly in rural and remote communities. We're also looking to try and make sure that we understand what's going awry in the pass rate and how we can better support those that are going through the system to be successful.
Can I just ask a question about that? Because obviously that initiative is excellent, but to only be in place for 12 months doesn't really seem to be a particularly long period of time. And then there are still a large number of young drivers and not necessarily older drivers who still don't have access, I understand, unless they go through McGuinness driver training, who've got a contract for X number. So what are we doing about the rest of our community for Ruatoria? I know REAP is working with them, but there'll be other young people who might not be picked up by REAP and Wairoa who need to come here. So that's fantastic, and it's the first step. But to cut it off after 12 months, I think it should be now we should be looking at going longer. And what about the rest of our population? So how are we providing an opportunity for them? Can you answer that, please?
Yes, in short, brilliantly made point, and it's almost like you're at the governance meeting on Monday. That's exactly the conversation we were having, is that we need to begin to plan what happens at the end of this 12 months. But as well, we have to make sure that we've got some concrete outcomes and things that we've learned in order to begin to ripple this out across your wider community, but as well elsewhere, because we'll have the same conversation when we do the Hawke's Bay Regional Transport Committee from Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay, and similarly over in Taranaki. The one thing that I would say is that doing this while we're going through the improvement program and getting a pilot off the ground to test some of what we're thinking is a really good move, because it helps inform where that improvement program lands. So I know it's not going to solve everybody's problem from day one, but it's solving some problems today in your community. That's probably the best way I can say that.
In the alternative, in 12 months, while you review it, and there will always be young people, not just young people either, acquiring licenses, where do they go in the interim?
To where they've always gone at the moment.
Well, I'm not saying you're responsible for Kotahi, but they had the opportunity on the coast, and everyone came into Ruatoria, and they were quite successful. The police were involved too at that stage. Now it means Gisborne or nothing. So you take that away, or when the program comes, surely you would look at this before the 12-month contract is up to see how successful it is
Through the chair.
and make a decision then.
Yeah, that's the absolute project in a nutshell that we're trying, that's the problem that we're trying to solve.
Mr. Wilson.
Just what you've outlined.
So through the chair, there's the long-term plan around how we look after our remote communities. How do we give them access to driver training? However, in the interim, council staff have met with police, Waka, Kotahi around how do we roll out something in the interim, and where are the gaps, and how do we make sure that we're not all chasing the same areas for funding to replicate what we're already doing in some areas as well. So there is a piece of work happening on the short term while the long-term plan is created for how those services are delivered to the community.
So to be really blunt, can we ask how young people whose parents train them to get their license, where do they go to be tested today?
So where they've always gone at the moment, but just what we've outlined.
And how long does it take? Isn't there huge delays?
My mother of a son
Yeah.
just his license, and he had to book a couple of months in advance, and that was in that period when you were still just
Yes.
looking at it. But can I just make a comment in regards to what Bill alluded to? Am I correct that my understanding is the Tairāwhiti REAP groups that are funded through this are actively supported by our Wharekahika Hicks Bay whānau, and they make sure that cohort is transported into Gisborne, they get training with McInnes, and then, is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah, thank
At the
you.
moment, we don't have the testing services available in those communities, so they're making
they
sure
come
they can
out
get-
here.
But the end game would be to have testing
Yes,
available.
local,
Yes.
right up the coast.
But that's the program we went, some of us went to the opening of, but I'm asking for other young people, how big is the delay? Because that was half the trouble. And it wasn't available, because not every child is going to, or young person or adult who doesn't actually have their license already, is going to be picked up by this program. So is there still a capacity and ability for people to get their test at a reasonable timeframe outside of this initiative?
Reasonable, I don't think it would meet everybody's expectations because of the capacity constraints. I'd need to come back to you on the definitive time that the current wait times are. But I do know at the moment we have additional testers in place. We have worked hard to do that. But is it what everybody would expect in terms of their wait time? I think there's still work to be done.
Thank you, but your very point about additional testers is valuable, so thank you for that, because that was what was discussed, I think, at the last meeting a couple of
Yes.
months ago, that we needed additional testers. Right, thank you.
One last slide for you, just around the long-term resilience planning. It has come up and it's been another, and rightly so, very hot topic in the community, that we're experiencing a lot of weather events, we're experiencing a lot of disruption. A lot of what we're doing is reactive, or it's hampering a lot of the longer term work that we're trying to do. What's the plan? We do have a plan, needs to be refreshed. And that is the single stage business case that came out of the Connecting Tairafiti programme business case. What this was done back in 2019 originally. We have Waka, Kotahi and Gisborne District Council come together. We said there's a real opportunity here for us to review and refresh that. Things have changed. Prioritisation of sites have changed. Are there other factors like the National Adaptation Plan that we need to consider into this to make sure that it's still meeting the needs and the expectations of communities, but also balancing that against available funding, priorities for investment. So that work is beginning to get underway now in terms of finding the resources for that. But there is a plan. We've just got to make sure that we work together collectively to ensure that it's up to date, it's fit for purpose, and it's going to meet the challenges within your community. We've shared this as well, this with ministers. They're aware because you and your community have been great in advocating that we need to understand what we're doing to support the community, and as well with your iwi leaders in the region too. And that's all from me.
Can I just ask, because I did flag it with you, the Turihau point, and the comment was raised by Mr. Williams earlier today. You reported to this meeting that it was going to, last year, that restoration would begin after freedom camping was lifted. And then I understand that clearly consenting takes some time, but can you give the public who will be listening to this and Herald who will be reporting it some confidence about when that work on Turihau Point is going to begin, please?
I can't give you a definite start date for the work. We have all of the materials there and ready to go, and we are prepared and waiting, but the consent process, to your officer's earlier comment, has been more complex given the impact that it has on the coastal area. So we're working through the final stages of that at the moment.
And can I ask, I mean, I think I know the answer regrettably, but what potential is there to look at the extension? Because that the new eroding area, which Mr. Williams again showed a photo of, which I flagged to Waka Kotahi when it began happening, is now back to the tar seal, and I'm quite sure it's not in the particular area that your consent applies for. So are we going to end up with a repaired Turihau Point and 50 metres away, another source of erosion?
So there is additional erosion, I think it's about 50 metres south of that. That is included within the consent and will be dealt with.
Right.
There's some further erosion that's about 500 metres further south again. That is not included, that's outside of the consent, but we are aware of it. It's not impacting the road at the moment. So we've prioritised that part.
Okay, thanks very much. That's much appreciated. Other questions to Ms. Stewart with respect to the report? Councillor Biddy.
Thank you. I'm never terribly supportive of Waka Kotahi, but in this instance, I'll say the same to you, Linda, that I said. David, I've had the opportunity to travel the coast road right around on 5 occasions since the last meeting. I must say the contractors of Waka Kotahi has got its act together. The contractors have been in those 2 massive dropouts north of Hicks Bay have been fixed. The contractors started on the Kupuro Hill on Monday. And looking at the action there, this is all down us. They're the main contractors, I understand. They're doing great work. And in Toko, the contractors have just rolled in there and started. So Well done.
Appreciate that.
Brownie points to you people.
Thank you. They will appreciate that.
Thank you, councillor Villiers. Councillor Worsnop.
Thank you. My question was just with regards to the resilience projects and the fact that I think you highlighted 2, possibly 3 of them are largely complete. So that really leaves Kopuaro Hill and I can't remember which one. Busby's Hill, yes. And obviously it's a fixed amount of budget for those. I mean, just knowing those sites and my confidence in the budget expanding to cover all that is not very high. What is the level of confidence that you have that actually Kopuaro Hill is not just going to be moved over and spend the next 5 years doing the same thing?
I would say high, because we have worked through, you're right, it is a fixed funding package, but that has been prioritized, and the ones that are to be underway and to be completed, the team are confident will be. Those that you have listed in there, we have to deliver 14 sites within that funding package. We've delivered 5 of them, and we're confident that we'll be able to deliver the remainder. There were definitely sites that were originally included that we had shared previously that would not be included within that funding package.
And they are reinstated and remediated as opposed to patched?
The ones that were you mentioned here?
Busby's Hill and Kopuaro, yes.
The ones that are for the resilience, yeah, that is long-term resilience. That's not reactive or smaller fixes.
Okay, thank you. Just
Yes.
clarifying.
Are there any? Thank you, Mr. Gaddam.
Just a quick one, the issue around fill sites on the coast, I'm just interested to understand where that's obviously council and Kotahi, that one, but it's obviously a real issue, particularly if we had another event tomorrow. I know all those sites are full. Presumably you just carry on regardless. But I'm just interested to know how that is progressing, because it's going to be pretty significant for us going forward. When we have these events, we've got nowhere to put the fill, clearing slips and what have you.
Through the chair for the local roads, we've worked to identify and are consenting, I think it's 9 sites across the district. That's on private property where we're working with the landowner. We're getting the consents. We're doing all the work to empty our stockpile sites that we have at the moment. The big push right now is to empty our stockpile sites so that we can use them for chip seal as we go into sealing season. We have about 50,000 cubes spread across the district. We are looking for a home for, so we're still keen to talk to people around filling in gullies, those sort of things. So we have got a number of other parties that we're talking to, particularly in the forestry industry, where we're looking to try and get access to put spoil, but it's an ongoing issue for us. Taniroto, for example, there's a massive amount just coming off those bluffs that we're trying to find a home for again as well.
Similar situation on the state highway. Private landowners, iwi partners, it's very complex, actually, is the short answer to that one, and it's not a quick fix, and it's one of the bigger challenges that the team have.
Any other questions? Perhaps just for a matter of record, because you've alluded to it, Ms. Stewart, are you able to reiterate the date by which council will know about the application for funding for all the emergency work that's been undertaken? You did comment on what good advocacy has been made on behalf of this district.
So I believe it's going to delegations and it's going to the September board meeting, is my understanding. Is that your advice as well?
First week of October, we will know. It's
you.
the very end of September is the
Yes.
meeting. We'll find out the week after, first week of October.
Are there any other questions in the room? Thank you very much for the comprehensive report, and it was excellent seeing our own Regional Land Transport annual report. I believe there's no further items of business, so I will move that the meeting be closed, and thank you all for your attendance. This is the last meeting of this triennium, so I want to acknowledge the community representatives that have made time available to be here at the Regional Land Transport Committee table. I thank the councillors that have been here, and I wish you all the very best and hope that we can see some progress in the huge amount of emergency work work that has to happen in Tairāwhiti. So thank you very much, and I declare the meeting closed.
If I can just make a comment on that too, I'm not sure if everyone realises, but we've got 3 of them that definitely won't be back. And it's very unfortunate because it's 3 rural councillors and they've been very strong in the roading sector. So yeah, I think we owe the community a lot of thanks to the 3 departing councillors. Yeah, they've all contributed very well to this. So thanks.
I think really, you know, all in all, I've been on the road transport committee for a long time. And probably a bloody nuisance at times, especially to David and Linda and her former representative. But all in all, I just want to acknowledge David, the staff, Linda and her staff being a bit tolerant, because without them and their important cogs in the whole machine, and not only council but government, they're so critically important as to our road maintenance and the refurbishment of roading at times, should I say. Hey, yeah, thank you very much, especially from the coast, David.
Yes, I am trying to say something. I'm not sure what happened while I was out the room, but what I wanted to do today is to thank our community members for their contribution. Thank you so much. I know this can be a frustrating process, and lots of times we talk about long-term plans, things that take a long time, but I do want to acknowledge your input. This is our last meeting of this term, so thank you so much for walking alongside us. But then most importantly, some of our most senior councillors will have their last Regional Transport Committee here today. And I do want to acknowledge Pat and Bill and Kerry. Thank you so much for being roading stalwarts, East Coast, Western. I know, Kerry, you're now an East Coast girl as well, but you used to be you're still a Western as well. Thank you for the knowledge, the lived experience, the preparation, the advocacy you've done on our behalf. You will be sorely missed. I'm sure we will still see you around. You will probably come and make submissions, or there would be emails or phone calls to make sure we're aware of what happened in those communities, because it is those lived experiences. Bill travels the Kopuarua Hill and Busby Hill all the time. Pat knows exactly what goes on the way in from Uawa. So just on behalf of all of us, Kerry as well. Am I missing someone? Yeah. I'll thank you if you have to go. No, but just on behalf of us at the Gisborne District Council, just a huge thank you for your contribution. We really, really appreciate that. I think let's do a little clap.
Yeah, absolutely.